brought, and hawks, and all of them brought, and the wonderful cattle drives in Red River, and the great Anthony Mann.
Unforgiven isn't just another Western, it's a movie. Its unusual storyline and twisted plot have kept audiences hooked for decades. Though critics doubted Clint Eastwood could direct and star as the lead, he proved them wrong. Watching it, you realize the old saying rings true: never judge a book by its cover. But behind every masterpiece lies hidden struggles and untold production secrets. From challenges on set to what the actors thought about their roles, today we uncover 20 weird facts about Unforgiven that may change how you see the film forever. Unforgiven was inspired by a political incident. Unlike several successful movies, Unforgiven's bizarre storyline and twisted plot distinguish it from the rest. Its inspiration explains it all. We all know how bloody and messy political activities can be sometimes, especially when the armed forces are involved. The particular political incident that influenced Unforgiven happened in 1991. The demise of a certain Rodney King shook the public and led to an uproar. Rodney King was a Los Angeles citizen who was beaten by several LAPD officers for resisting arrest, with all officers acquitted of any wrongdoing. Unfortunately for the officers, that particular incident had been captured on camera. After the masses watched it, a public outcry and outrage for perceived police racism and brutality followed. Clint Eastwood wasn't the first choice. The offer was not very serious, thank God. I say that for myself, the poor public, and for Clint, absolutely. I would have been a total failure, total. Who would have wanted to see that? I wouldn't. I would have just been acting, said John Malkovich. If you are wondering who John Malkovich is and why he said what he said, here's why. Clint Eastwood wasn't the first choice for anything. He was never chosen at first to direct the movie, nor was he selected as the lead. In the early 1980s, Francis Ford Coppola was sent the script for Unforgiven. As expected, Coppola loved it and was willing to direct the movie. However, the lack of funds discouraged him. Although he made several efforts to get the finances, it wasn't attainable. Before Coppola gave up directing the movie, he chose John Malkovich for the lead role and actually met with him to discuss it. But as we all know, Clint Eastwood starred as the lead. Francis Ford Coppola optioned it in '84. He took it around but couldn't get financing. Clint picked up the option in 1985 and said he was making it next year several times. My wife was at the Telluride Film Festival the year before last, and Clint walked on stage. He told the audience he was overwhelmed by the scenery and figured it was probably time to make his Western. I was thrilled, said David Webb Peoples in an interview. Now the question is, how did Clint Eastwood come about the movie's script? A longtime associate of Clint Eastwood, Sonia Chernus, got a copy of the movie's script in the 1980s. After reading it, she wrote a memo to Clint Eastwood in 1984. "We would have been far better not to have accepted trash like this piece of inferior work. I can't think of one good thing to say about it, except maybe get rid of it fast." After reading the memo, Clint Eastwood took her advice and abandoned the script. He said, "I thought I should do some other things first." The script sat in his drawer for 10 years before he finally began its production. Even while he was looking for someone to rewrite a different project, he stumbled on the script. After reading it, he instantly loved it and knew immediately that he would direct the movie. Aside from directing the movie, he also chose himself as the lead. In Unforgiven, Clint Eastwood plays William Money, an aging former outlaw, and Keller called out of retirement for one final job. Although some sources claim that he had totally forgotten about the script and stumbled upon it by chance, Clint Eastwood said he kept pushing Unforgiven back because he wanted to wait until he was old enough to play the lead. David Webb Peoples remarked on Clint Eastwood's performance in the movie's production, "Francis would have done it brilliantly as he does everything else, but it's hard to imagine anyone making it as straightforwardly and uncompromisingly as Clint. No studio would have made it that dark, moody. With a lot of voices, things generally end up becoming blander and more accessible." Unforgiven was Clint Eastwood saying, "This is what I'm gonna do. Get out of my way." Clint Eastwood starred in the lead role in most movies he directed. He started directing films like the thriller Play Misty for Me, 1971, the westerns High Plains, Drifter, 1972, the outlaw Josie Wales, 1976, and the espionage thriller The Eiger Sanction, 1975. Off-screen, Clint Eastwood made national headlines in 1986 when he was elected mayor of Carmel, California, where he served for 2 years. The movie Taxi Driver had an influence on Unforgiven. I see Taxi Driver and people are getting killed, and the characters maintained how they would be in real life. But at the same time, it's an entertaining movie. Taxi Driver opened up what entertainment could be. It said, yeah, you can write this stuff and it'll be entertaining, David Webb Peoples said. Aside from the political incident, Unforgiven was also influenced by a movie. David Webb Peoples initially wrote the film from 1970s to 1976. According to the writer, two major influences were cited. One was the Western novel The Shootist, written by Glendon Swarthout in 1975, which later turned into a 1976 movie starring John Wayne, while the other was from a film titled Taxi Driver 1976. Jack N. Green and Clint Eastwood go way back. He made a major contribution to the film. The director of photography for Unforgiven, Jack N. Green, had worked with Clint Eastwood. He said that was the 5th time he had worked with the legend. He worked with him on Heartbreak Ridge, 1986, Bird, 1988, White Hunter Blackheart, 1990, and The Rookie, 2002. Jack N. Green was the reason why Unforgiven was successfully filmed in Canada. As his job required, Jack N. Green had been shooting a film in Canada a few years earlier, and someone asked him if Clint Eastwood would ever make a movie there. Then Jack N. Green replied, no, because he can't bring his family. When he said family, he meant the crew Clint Eastwood liked to work with. He could tell this because he had worked with him for a while. According to the rule, if a filmmaker works in a different country, they would be expected to hire local crew members. As a result of Jack N. Green's response, the Canadian Union decided to offer Clint Eastwood a deal. They said they would waive the standard rules for any crew member who could prove they had worked on at least 5 Eastwood movies. Clint Eastwood brought with him 50 people in total. All thanks to Jack N. Green, Unforgiven was shot successfully in Canada. Richard Harris made some improvisations. Richard Harris said to Eastwood, "It would be great if I could play this man as a very sort of upper-class fake. And at the end, when he gets the hell beaten out of him, all of that drops. And you see behind it all, he's really sort of a lowlife and speaks in a lower-class Cockney accent." Clint Eastwood couldn't argue with those suggestions. He loved it and told Richard Harris to go for it. He stuck to his word. And Richard Harris's improvisations were exactly what played out in the movie. Richard Harris played English Bob in Unforgiven and made a few improvisations. English Bob is a secondary character in the movie. He is a gunslinger with a fearsome reputation who has been inventing stories about himself to enhance his image. Richard Harris was the right man for the role because he was known for his notorious drinking antics, which didn't stop him from being a skilled actor. One thing that points Richard Harris out in the movie is his refined upper-class English accent. This accent goes well with his English name, Bob. Lenny Niehaus had a background in jazz music. Lenny was not an extrovert. He expressed himself through playing, and he could play pretty damn good. He was a humble guy. If you were just talking in general, you'd think he worked at a bank or something. But if you started talking about music, he came alive. I'll miss him, said Clint Eastwood on Lenny Niehaus's demise. Lenny Niehaus was the primary brain behind the music on Unforgiven. He was known originally as a saxophonist and jazz composer before he diverted into the movie industry in the 1970s. Lenny Niehaus worked on movies like Straw Dogs 1971 and Bring Me the Head of Alfredo Garcia 1974. It happened that he and Clint Eastwood had the same taste in music, and they also went way back. They loved jazz music, and Lenny Niehaus had previously scored Clint Eastwood's movies. Although Lenny Niehaus received no award recognition for his Unforgiven score, Clint Eastwood never stopped associating with him. In fact, Clint Eastwood hired Lenny Niehaus 13 times as a composer for his films and 6 times as an orchestrator. Clint Eastwood maintained a close relationship with him until his demise in May 2020. He was 90 years old. Gene Hackman originally never wanted anything to do with Unforgiven. "I swore I would never be involved in a picture with this much violence in it," Gene Hackman said in a DVD interview. "But the more I read it and the more I came to understand the film's purpose, the more fascinated I became." Clint Eastwood knew from the start that Gene Hackman was the right man for the role of Little Bill Daggett, the sheriff who becomes the nemesis of Will Money. However, it took a lot of persuasion to make Gene Hackman finally accept the role. Clint Eastwood sent Gene Hackman the screenplay and told him he wanted him to play the sheriff's character. Although Gene Hackman was impressed with the script, he turned the part down. The reason was that Gene Hackman, a famous anti-gun violence, was genuinely concerned that Unforgiven had too many gun scenes. But Clint Eastwood wasn't one to give up. He called Gene Hackman and said, "That's the opposite of the film I want to make. Unforgiven isn't about the heroics of gunslingers. I want to show the inglorious and dark side of the Wild West, the brutality of that time and place. I think we could make something that shows that side of gun violence." Gene Hackman was obviously convinced after that conversation, seeing that he was the one who played that role in the movie, even if he made a few notes on the script. Former LA Police Chief Daryl Gates influenced Gene Hackman's role. As earlier revealed, a political incident inspired Unforgiven, and the Los Angeles Chief of Police at the time of the incident was Daryl Gates. It was that same Daryl Gates that Clint Eastwood asked Gene Hackman to model the character of Little Bill on. Daryl Gates was a 40-year veteran of the LAPD who had been criticized for what was popularly considered a heavy-handed, militarized, and racist approach to policing. It came to a head with the Rodney King beating in March of 1991, followed by the acquittal of the officers and the ensuing riots a year later. Gene Hackman saw parallels between Daryl Gates and Sheriff Daggett, especially since the character most abused by Daggett was to be played by a black actor, Morgan Freeman. According to Clint Eastwood biographer Richard Schickel, who was on the Unforgiven set, Gene Hackman later referred to the moment in the film where Bill oversees Ned Logan's torture as "my Rodney King scene." 6 weeks before Unforgiven hit the theaters, Daryl Gates resigned from the LAPD and passed away in 2010. Lenny Niehaus wasn't the only one who contributed to the film's music. Although, as earlier revealed, Lenny Niehaus was the primary brain behind Unforgiven's beautiful score, Clint Eastwood also played a role. Lenny Niehaus did most of the heavy lifting as a professional, but the main melody came from Clint Eastwood. Surprisingly, Clint Eastwood wrote the scores for several more movies alone. He is also a lifelong devotee of jazz and an accomplished pianist. The whimsical and sentimental Honky Tonk Man, 1982, set during the Great Depression, featured Clint Eastwood as a country singer dying of tuberculosis whose dream is to make it to the Grand Ole Opry before he passes on. The title Unforgiven wasn't its original title. Most movie titles offer their viewers an insight into what the movie would most likely be like, but in the case of Unforgiven, it's pretty hard to connect the title's significance to the movie itself. Clint Eastwood changed the movie's name after he read Webb Peoples' script. After reading the script, he had some ideas for changing it, but said, "The more I fiddled with it, the more I realized I was screwing it up." Aside from changing a few things, he did end up changing the movie's title. Before the movie was titled Unforgiven, it was initially called The Cut Whore Killings, and then The William Money Killings. Clint Eastwood made a few other changes in the script. Although few changes were made in the movie's original script, Clint Eastwood made a few exceptions. One of his amends was to remove the voice-over in the opening scene, replacing it with the title text we see at the movie's start. Another change he made was to change the end scene. After taking care of his bloody business in the town of Big Whiskey, the screenplay ends with Money returning to his Kansas homestead, where he has a tender reunion with his children, calling his daughter a lady, and gently praising his son for taking care of the farm. But a tension underlies that tenderness as he keeps the truth of his journey hidden from both children. "I guess you didn't cull anybody then," Will Jr. remarks to his father after Money declines to explain the exact reason for their sudden financial windfall. "Naw, son, I didn't cull anybody," the color lies through gritted teeth. People say that he modeled the scene directly after the final moments of Francis Ford Coppola's The Godfather, where Michael Al Pacino lies to Kay, Diane Keaton, about his involvement in the Gangland massacre that solidified his standing as the new Don Corleone. What's good about that scene is that it means that the cullings aren't triumphant, the writer explains. Money doesn't say, "I killed that motherfucker, he's ashamed of what he's done." Clint Eastwood told Peoples that he cut that scene mainly for pacing reasons. According to him, the movie was over, and it didn't seem wise to keep people around for 5 more minutes. Instead, in the end, a closing title card is displayed, which states that Will's mother-in-law found his farm abandoned years later, Will possibly having moved to San Francisco with the children. She remained at a loss to understand why her daughter married such a notorious outlaw and murderer. Henry Bumstead went all out in bringing Western Town to life. A movie's location plays a massive role in shaping its concept. For Unforgiven, the area was just perfect, all thanks to Henry Bumstead and his team. Henry Bumstead was the production designer for Unforgiven. As Clint Eastwood projected the movie's concept, he and his team got to work. They built the main set for the 1880s town of Big Whiskey, Wyoming, on a lonesome prairie in Alberta from which no signs of modern civilization could be seen in any direction. The nearest big city was Calgary, which was 60 miles away. For authenticity, and since so much of the movie was to be shot on this set, all of the buildings were fully functional and expensive, not just facades. Clint Eastwood, you don't know what you don't have to do. He understands plans, and you don't have to show him anything. I mean, he trusts me, and I pick the locations myself. And he may look at a few of them, and others he doesn't, and then he may not see them till he gets there. Still, he's very clever with the camera and the camera movements, so he makes everything look pretty good, said Henry Bumstead in an interview. Clint's a wonderful director, I'll tell you, and I have a great relationship with him and Jack Taylor, who works with me, my art director, and he knows Clint too. We know what he likes, and he's just fun to work with, he said. I would never have worked this long if it hadn't been for Clint Eastwood, but he's just fun to work with. I tell you, you get up in the morning and you can't wait to get to the set, to see what he will do with it. It's just he's a joy, he added further. There was not a single car on set. The movie Unforgiven was based on the historical setting of the Old West, specifically where cars weren't functional. Therefore, featuring a car in the film would have been way out of place. Clint Eastwood wanted the movie's set to maintain its Old West feel, so no modern vehicles were permitted on set. The reason why the Unforgiven shooting script was entirely in white. According to People, Frances Fisher, who played Strawberry Alice, told him this was the first time she saw a shooting script entirely in white. Most of them are multicolored, full of blue and red pages or whatever, representing various changes in the screenplay. And the reason behind that was simple. The crew members could avoid distracting colors as they paid attention to the script's progress. David Webb Peoples said, I didn't meet Clint in person until he invited me to see the movie at Warner Brothers, but he and I were in sync enough that he didn't feel it necessary to ask for rewrites. The mystery behind Clint Eastwood's cowboy boots. In the movie, the main character, Clint Eastwood, is seen rocking cowboy boots. Those are the same boots he wore in the 1950s US TV show Rawhide. Isn't that surprising? Those boots are now a part of Clint Eastwood's private collection. Eastwood started from Rawhide, so those boots bookended his career in westerns. Morgan Freeman wanted to star in the movie so bad he asked for it. Morgan Freeman, who played Ned Logan, Money's old friend and right-hand man, who joins him on this last job, asked for a role in the movie. Since no other prominent names were attached to the role of Ned, Morgan Freeman decided to hop on the offer by approaching Clint Eastwood. When Morgan Freeman was filming Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, 1991, his co-star Kevin Costner told him about a project Clint Eastwood was preparing to direct, Unforgiven. Costner suggested that Morgan Freeman would be perfect for one of the roles. This interested Morgan Freeman, so he asked his agent to track down the script. After reading it, he personally called Clint Eastwood to express his interest. Eastwood agreed that Freeman would be a great fit, casting him as Ned Logan. For Morgan Freeman, Unforgiven came at a pivotal moment in his career. Positioned between Glory and Seven, the mid-1990s marked his peak as an actor. Yet in Unforgiven, he stepped into a supporting role as Ned, a retired outlaw persuaded to ride once again alongside his old friend William Money, played by Clint Eastwood himself. Together, they set out to claim a bounty offered by a group of Essex workers seeking justice. The film also featured Gene Hackman as Little Bill Daggett, a brutal sheriff whose authority rested on intimidation and violence. Morgan Freeman later spoke warmly of working with Gene Hackman, admitting he was saddened when the veteran actor retired around 2004 from the screen. Yet he also confessed that during filming, there were moments when Gene Hackman's intensity made the terror on screen bleed into reality. One particular scene was especially harrowing. Little Bill captures Ned and whips him mercilessly, torturing him for information. According to Morgan Freeman's experience filming the scene, he said, "The essence to me of acting is listening. Gene leaned into my ear and he said, and I'll paraphrase this, I'm going to ask you some questions, and if your answers don't match up with the answers that I've already got, I'm going to hurt you." I believed him. Clint Eastwood wasn't the only Eastwood on set. Mrs. Wood told the Carmel City Council in 1993 how her film debut as an extra in a train boarding scene in Unforgiven was edited out after her director's son filmed the scene 8 times. "I ended up on the cutting room floor," she said, accepting a city certificate of appreciation for Eastwood's 1986-88 tenure as mayor. Ruth Wood would appear as an extra in a scene where she boards a train. Clint Eastwood had her working a full day's shooting in a heavy dress, but in the edit he cut the scene out of the film. Clint Eastwood's mother was in her 80s at the time. As Eastwood won Oscars for Best Picture and Best Director for the gritty Western Unforgiven, he praised his mother, who was beaming in the crowd wearing a black and silver gown. "It's like every mother's dream," Mrs. Wood told a San Francisco Chronicle reporter the next day. "It was pretty unbelievable to have him say that, although we are naturally close." By all accounts, Clint Eastwood and his mother had a powerful relationship, and he often turned to her for advice. She first suggested casting Meryl Streep opposite Clint Eastwood in the steamy romance The Bridges of Madison County, which he directed. "He always sought her advice," said Carmel resident and civic volunteer Pat Sipple, who met Eastwood and his mother in 1970 while working on a benefit celebrity tennis tournament at Pebble Beach. At the 2004 Academy Awards, Eastwood and his mother walked hand in hand on the red carpet. "I just felt a close mother-son bond," Sipple said. In 1986, after Clint Eastwood was sworn in as the mayor of Carmel, Mrs. Wood told reporters attending the event that her son would be a fine mayor. "Don't cut it down too fine," Eastwood joked. "I'll be great." Despite its violent nature, Unforgiven surprisingly had positive critical remarks. One would have thought that Unforgiven would fall into the category of movies that became a huge flop. Surprisingly, the reverse was the case. In terms of critics, the film did incredibly well on its release. The LA Times said, "Unforgiven is the finest classical Western to come along since John Ford's The Searchers in 1956. Empire magazine gave the film 5 stars. This is a must-see if one cares for the Western or not, and an extremely satisfying one for all Eastwood fans. Ironically, the ultimate Western was made decades after its heyday. Famous movie critic Roger Ebert, who initially criticized the film for being overlong and having unnecessary characters like English Bob, still gave the movie 4 stars out of 4 and put it in his great movies list. Today on Rotten Tomatoes, Unforgiven has a critics' approval rating of 96% and an audience approval rating of 93%. And on IMDb, it scored 8 points out of 10. Like other revisionist Westerns, Unforgiven is less a celebration of the Old West than a dismantling of it. Where classic Westerns painted the frontier in stark shades of good and evil, Clint Eastwood's film lingers in the gray, reminding us again and again of the darkness that hides beneath the myths. William Money, once a drunken murderer and gunfighter, now lives as a sober farmer, but his past clings to him like a shadow. The lives he's taken haunt him, and his attempts at redemption are fragile at best. The story itself mirrors this inversion of Western tradition. Instead of riding out to avenge a God-fearing innocent, Money and his companions take on a job for a group of prostitutes, seeking retribution for one of their own. The supposed fearless gunslingers they encounter along the way reveal themselves as cowards, liars, or men too broken to cull again. Even the stories about the West are corrupted, and an eager writer spins legends out of criminals, crafting them into larger-than-life figures that bear little resemblance to the cruel reality. Far from a noble force, the law is embodied in Gene Hackman's Little Bill Daggett, a former gunslinger turned sheriff who enforces order through brutality and merciless punishment. His justice is swift, pitiless, and self-serving. And in the end, Money, who has tried to resist slipping back into violence, finds himself driven to vengeance by the death of his old friend. What emerges is not the righteous Western hero of old, but a man reverting to cold-blooded culling someone who survives not because he is good, but because he is ruthless enough to endure. The movie suggests with unflinching honesty that the myth of the Western hero was always a lie. The West was not a place of honor, but of survival, and survival rarely looked heroic. According to film scholar Alan Redman, Money's role is described as an anti-hero by stating he is a virtuous or an injured hero who overcomes all obstacles to see that evil is eradicated, using whatever means necessary. Unforgiven earned Clint Eastwood a long-awaited award. When asked why he had never been nominated for an Oscar, Clint Eastwood replied, "First, I'm not Jewish. Secondly, I make too much money. Thirdly, and most importantly, I don't give a fuck." Despite the several masterpieces that Clint Eastwood appeared in or directed, Unforgiven was the first movie to earn him an Oscar. Having never been so much as nominated before, even if he did appear in numerous classics, Clint Eastwood held a long-standing belief that he would never win an Oscar, but Unforgiven proved them wrong. Clint Eastwood was nominated for Best Actor for the movie and won Best Director. The film itself also won the Best Picture award. Unforgiven had a rather unusual remake. There were never any sequels to Unforgiven. Instead, the story stood alone, self-contained, and final. However, the tale was reborn on the other side of the world in 2013. Japanese actor Ken Watanabe stepped into the role of William Money in Unforgiven, directed by Lee Sang II. This remake exchanged the dust of the American frontier for the landscapes of early 20th century Japan. In terms of plot, it was a faithful beat-for-beat retelling of Eastwood's film, yet its cultural backdrop lent the story an entirely new resonance. Critics embraced it, and the film earned a 94% score on Rotten Tomatoes. The original Unforgiven was released in 1992. A revisionist Western written by David Webb Peoples, it was directed and produced by Clint Eastwood, who also starred as William Money. David Webb Peoples had started his career as a film editor in the 1970s, writing screenplays on the side. His first breakthrough came when he co-wrote Blade Runner for Ridley Scott. Unforgiven cemented his reputation, and later credits included Hero, 12 Monkeys, and Soldier. Unforgiven began filming on August 26, 1991 and finished in November. Much of it was shot in Alberta, Canada, under the supervision of cinematographer Jack Green. Eastwood, who composed the film's poignant theme, Claudia's theme, also oversaw the music. Even the trailer featured original music by Randy J. Shams and Tim Stitham. At last, the movie was done and ready to be released. Unforgiven grossed over $159 million worldwide on a budget of just $14.4 million. The movie debuted at #1 at the box office, setting a record for Clint Eastwood's best opening weekend, and later returned to the top 10 following its Oscar success. The film also won 4 Academy Awards: Best Picture, Best Director for Eastwood, Best Supporting Actor for Gene Hackman, and Best Film Editing for Joel Cox. Clint Eastwood was nominated for Best Actor but lost to Al Pacino in Scent of a Woman. At the end of the credits, Eastwood included a simple dedication for Sergio and Don, a tribute to his mentors Sergio Leone and Don Siegel. Over time, the film's reputation grew, garnering a strong fan base. In 2004, the Library of Congress selected Unforgiven for preservation in the National Film Registry, recognizing its cultural and historical significance. 4 years later, the American Film Institute ranked it 4th among the greatest American Westerns, behind only The Searchers, High Noon, and Shane. The Writers Guild of America placed People's screenplay among the top 30 ever written in 2013. For Clint Eastwood, Unforgiven was always meant to be a farewell, a final statement on the Western genre that had defined much of his career. He insisted it would be his last traditional Western, wary of repeating himself or imitating others. Eastwood created a magnum opus that is uniquely entertaining and profoundly thoughtful. His direction balances grit with raw humanity, making Unforgiven stand apart from the typical Western. There is a deep sense of vulnerability in William Money's character and Morgan Freeman's Ned Logan. Both men carry the weight of their past, haunted by who they once were and what they have become. Ned Logan in particular embodies this tension. He realizes he is no longer the fearless gunman of his youth, and this dawning awareness becomes his undoing. When he departs from the trio he formed with Money and the Schofield Kid, it is not just a physical separation, but a symbolic surrender to time, mortality, and regret. That departure ultimately costs him his life. But even before his fate is sealed, the audience senses his internal collapse. There is disillusionment in Ned's eyes, a quiet disappointment that he cannot reclaim the man he once was. The disenchantment runs deeper than missed glory. It is the painful recognition that some doors, once closed, never reopen. He longs to recover the strength, courage, and ruthlessness that defined him in earlier years, but that possibility is denied. In this way, his arc becomes a meditation on aging, memory, and the irreversibility of choices, adding to the film's enduring power and tragic resonance. What are your sincere comments about the movie? Which of these facts shocked you the most? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more interesting content. Before you go, watch the other videos on your screen.